Have you ever found yourself wondering, who am I really?
Mm.
Or maybe, why do I act like a completely different person when I'm with my family compared to, say, when I'm at work?
Yeah, that feeling, it's pretty common, I think, this sense of having like multiple versions of yourself floating around.
Exactly. Well, today we're taking a deep dive into this fascinating concept of the self.
Hmm.
And not just as some, philosophical puzzle, but as a dynamic, evolving structure.
Mhm.
Something that, believe it or not, can actually be mapped.
It's a truly groundbreaking approach, really, a way to visualize and understand our inner worlds.
And our guide for this exploration is material from Lloyd Hawkeye Robertson's book, The Evolved Self.
That's right. It introduces this, well, unique way to unpack how our identities form, how they shift, and how they interact with, well, everything around us.
So our mission in this deep dive is to give you some genuinely surprising insights, and maybe, just maybe, a brand new lens to view your own ever-changing identity through.
Sounds good.
So where do we even begin? How do we start to understand what this self is actually made of?
Right. Well, to understand the self from this perspective, we first need to talk about the concept of a meme.
Okay, but probably not what people first think of.
Definitely not. Forget the internet jokes for a moment.
Yeah.
Here, a meme is defined as the smallest unit of culture.
Smallest unit of culture. Okay.
And it's more than just an idea. It's like a package deal. It has 4 key components.
4, right.
Yeah. There's the referent, what it actually points to.
Well.
Then the connotative part, the associated meanings.
Okay, like the ideas or feelings connected to it?
Sort of, yeah. That leads into the affective part, which is the actual emotional feel of it.
The feeling. Got it.
And finally, the behavioral component, what it makes you do.
Okay, let's try an example. That might help make it concrete.
Good idea.
What about, say, morning coffee?
Perfect. So the referent is the actual coffee, the drink itself.
Right.
Its connotative meaning might be comfort, maybe my daily ritual, or just the start of my day. The affective part, that's that warm, energized feeling you get even just thinking about it.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And the behavioral bit, you reaching for that mug every single morning. That's the whole meme package.
Wow, okay. Referent, connotative, affective, behavioral.
Yeah.
That's a lot packed into one simple thing like coffee.
Exactly. And these memes, they're incredibly transmittable, person to person.
Like ideas spreading.
Yeah, but here's the interesting twist. They're rarely copied exactly. Each person sort of puts their own spin on it, interprets them uniquely.
Okay.
And what's really crucial is that memes sharing similar qualities, say the same emotional feel or related meanings, they tend to link together.
They attract each other.
That's the idea. It's called memetic attraction, and this linking is what creates stability in our self-structure.
Stability.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So if our self is built from these cultural blocks, these memes, how do we actually visualize something so abstract? This is where the self-mapping comes in.
Precisely. The self is mapped by identifying these cultural units, these memes, from someone's personal narrative.
From their stories, what they
Yeah.
say about themselves.
Exactly. Their stories, their beliefs, their experiences, and then you represent them graphically.
Like drawing it out.
Yeah. Imagine putting the memes in ovals, then you draw lines connecting them based on those shared qualities we talked about, affective, connotative, behavioral, or referent.
And some are more important than others.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The memes that are most important to someone, or maybe the ones they'd find hardest to give up those, are seen as more central on the map, closer to the core of their self.
And this is where we start seeing that fluidity you mentioned, the different versions of us.
Right. The process often shows that people present context-specific mini-selves, like how you are at work versus home.
Oh, okay.
On the map, these are often shown within a cloud, reflecting how our identities can sort of shift depending on the situation. We aren't just one monolithic self.
That's fascinating. Is there an example of this mapping in action?
Oh, absolutely. There's a really powerful case study in the material Susie, a suicidal youth whose self was mapped.
Okay.
Her initial map vividly showed these key interconnected memes like depressed person, suicidal, and angry, all linked together.
Wow.
And these linked memes acted as what the book calls cognitive scripts.
Cognitive scripts, like internal instructions.
Pretty much, like pre-programmed pathways leading to very patterned behaviors. You feel X which triggers thought Y, leading to action Z.
And seeing it mapped out must have been revealing.
Hugely. But Susie's case also revealed something profound, maybe even counterintuitive.
What's that?
That you can't just delete parts of yourself, even the parts you hate.
You can't just erase depressed person.
Well, the insight was that our deepest need seems to be for self-stability, coherence. So just trying to remove those negative identifiers, depressed, suicidal, without first building something new to fill that space.
It could backfire.
Exactly. It could actually lead to self-fragmentation, shatter her identity further. The approach isn't subtraction. It's more like thoughtful renovation, careful restructuring.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's not about demolition.
No. Which leads us to that really big question. Is the self fixed? Or is it constantly shifting?
Yeah, is it set in stone or always under construction?
The material strongly suggests self-construction is an accumulative process.
Yeah.
You build on what's there. You don't usually tear down the old self completely.
Right. It's like that house analogy you mentioned. You don't bulldoze the whole thing.
Exactly. You might take out a crumbling wall here, buttress that section there, renovate old rooms, add new wings.
Yeah. And think about kids growing up. Older children start describing themselves with psychological traits. I'm kind, I'm smart. But they don't lose the physical descriptions like, I have blue eyes. They're adding abstract layers onto that concrete base, building up.
Precisely. Accumulating.
Yeah.
And this also helps explain why our self-concept changes with context.
Like the teenager study.
Yeah. Adolescents often describe themselves as, say, more spontaneous and intimate with their close friends than with their parents.
But it's not like they become a totally different person.
Maybe not. The idea is that this fluidity might just be the flashlight of awareness, focusing on different parts of a much larger existing self-structure.
So it feels like different selves, but it's more like highlighting different rooms in that house.
That's a good way to put it. It creates the illusion of distinct selves, rather than entirely separate ones.
Okay. So if our self isn't just this fixed cognitive thing, what about the brain? Biology? How does that fit in, especially things beyond just conscious thought?
That's a great point. And the material brings in Damasio's work here, which is really interesting. He talks about two types of self.
Two types?
Yeah. There's the autobiographical self. That's the reflective, conscious you, the storyteller of your life, akin to maybe Kant's empirical self.
Okay, the one I'm aware of day to day.
Pretty much. But then there's a more fundamental level, the proto-self.
Proto-self.
It's deeper, more emotion-based, tied to your body's basic feelings and sensations. It's often operating below conscious awareness, maybe like Kant's transcendental self, in a way.
Emotion-based. So does that mean consciousness isn't entirely separate from emotion? Our feelings could actually shape our sense of self.
That's the implication. Our emotional states might profoundly influence our perception of who we are at any given moment.
And this gets even more interesting when you think about the mind's power. I remember reading that thinking about moving can cause brain changes, almost like actually moving.
It's incredible, isn't it? It shows how just directing our attention, focusing our minds can influence neuroplasticity.
Shaping the brain itself.
Yeah. And how our conscious scripts, those internal programs or stories we tell ourselves, can directly impact our emotional functioning. We can, in a very real way, reshape our internal landscape through focused thought.
That's incredibly powerful. And it makes me think about a common experience. When people make a positive change, they often talk about finding their true self.
Right. And the old self suddenly feels false or not really me.
Exactly. We see it in so many stories.
Absolutely. The book gives examples like Chantel. She moved from a self-identified as criminal to becoming a counselor. And she genuinely felt that old self was false.
A complete shift in identity.
Or Magdalene, who had the motorbike accident. She refused the label disabled. Instead, she forged this new athletic identity through wheelchair basketball.
Finding strength in adversity.
And Brent, who saw himself as having low academic ability, he transformed into a successful learner, a coach, a teacher.
Amazing stories. But then there's Fridel's journey, which adds another layer.
A very important layer. Her experience as a transsexual person was different. Her female self felt innate, unchanging. It was always there.
So for her, it wasn't about becoming someone new.
No. Her physical changes, like the orchidectomy, she saw them as acts of self-maintenance, aligning her physical body with the mental reality that was already true for her, becoming more herself, not different.
That's a profound distinction. Self-maintenance versus transformation.
And that innate sense of self often ties into our sense of agency, our ability to act. The material calls this the animator meme.
The animator.
Yeah.
Like the one driving the action.
Exactly. It's that self-identification as someone who plans, who acts purposefully to achieve goals. It's really closely linked to self-esteem, feeling empowered.
But it's not always straightforward, is it? I think you mentioned it can be influenced by other factors.
That's the surprising part. While the animator shows agency, it can be modified by what are called environmentally driven or more passive memes.
Meaning?
Well, think of Mei Mao, the deference student whose culture heavily influenced her choices, almost overriding her personal animation. Or Magdalene, whose path felt like a Forrest Gump life at times, shaped significantly by external events.
So there's a balance between our internal drive and external forces.
Definitely. And what does this all suggest? It suggests that this modern self, this conscious, choosing, reflecting self, is actually a relatively recent evolutionary adaptation.
A new feature, evolutionarily speaking.
Kind of. It gives us this potential for what we often call free will, conscious control over raw instincts.
Allowing us to make choices that go against basic drives, like choosing celibacy or extreme altruism.
Precisely. Rather than just reacting purely on impulse or instinct, it's a layer of control.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've looked inward. Now let's widen the lens. How does this individual self, built from memes, connect with the bigger picture? Society, culture, language, beliefs.
It's absolutely fundamental. The self is profoundly learned, and the primary vehicle for that learning is language.
Language is key.
It's how we communicate complex ideas, how we store learned responses, how we engage in vicarious learning from other stories, experiences, warnings.
And isn't there that idea, Chomsky's universal grammar, suggesting we're kind of hardwired for language?
Exactly. It suggests an innate linguistic capacity, possibly co-evolved with our social instincts. We're built to connect and communicate.
So if culture is encoded in language,
And the self is built from units of culture, memes.
then language must fundamentally shape how our self is both constrained and expressed.
Absolutely. Different languages with their different structures and concepts can literally lead to different ways of constructing the self, different ways of being.
Wow. And then there's how we figure out what's real. How does society play into that?
Well, what we accept as true is, to a large degree, negotiated with the people around us. It's socially constructed, in a way.
So even if I think I'm the world's greatest singer,
You probably need someone else to agree, or at least not actively disagree, for that belief to feel solid.
right, we need some external validation.
We constantly reference this perceived objective reality, even if we're also holding on to some, let's say, self-enhancing illusions. Our ability to really live our defined self depends on a degree of acceptance from others. Without it, that self can feel, well, hollow.
It rings hollow, yeah.
And this brings us to a constant tension within the modern self, a real push and pull
Between
our individual interests, our personal goals, and the needs or well-being of the collective. Individualism versus collectivism.
and that plays out differently in different cultures, obviously.
Hugely. But even within a culture typically seen as highly individualistic, like the US, the material shows there's significant variation. People prioritize personal versus social identity differently, even within the same society. It's a spectrum.
And there are critiques, right? Like about positive psychology, maybe pushing individualism too hard.
Yes, some critics argue it might inadvertently promote what they call a disguised ideology of individualism, focusing perhaps too much on personal happiness without enough regard for social context or responsibility. That's a point raised in the discourse.
Okay, what about when cultures clash? Or when someone is removed from their culture?
That can have a massive dislocating impact on the self. Cultural relocation or losing connection with a supportive cultural community can seriously threaten your whole self-validation system.
Making you feel lost, unstable.
Exactly. It can lead to real self-instability. And this connects directly to something incredibly serious mentioned in the source material.
The Indian residential schools in Canada.
Yes. The material highlights this as a tragic example where the macro society deliberately attempted to essentially re-engineer the selves of Indigenous children.
By forcibly removing them from their families, communities, languages, cultures.
Precisely. The stated goal was assimilation, but the result, as the book notes, was often the creation of structurally incomplete and conflicted selves. It underscores just how vital that cultural connection is for a coherent identity.
That's devastating. And it really emphasizes the role of narrative, doesn't it? The stories we live by.
It does, which brings us nicely to narrative therapy.
Right. What's the core idea there?
Narrative therapy views the self as an understanding and interpretation based on our interactions and our subjective take on them. Essentially, our self is a set of beliefs arranged in the form of a personal story.
We are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves.
In a way, yes, and culture provides the materials for these stories, the plots, the characters, the values. We use these materials, and we negotiate our own story, ourself, with others.
And our agency, our power, comes from choosing the story that seems to fit best in a given situation.
That's a key part of it, choosing or reauthoring our story. But this whole idea of subjective interpretation and multiple stories raises some tricky issues in our postmodern world.
Yeah, the idea of relativism. If everything is just a story, what happens to truth?
Well, that's the concern raised. If truth becomes merely a matter of personal preference or group consensus, then objective realities, things like, the historical fact of the Holocaust, or the scientific consensus on global warming, or the moral imperative of racial equality.
They can just be dismissed as your interpretation or your narrative.
That's the danger, that they can be waved away as just one story among many equally valid stories.
And this can lead to tribalism.
That's the term used. Groups with fundamentally different worldviews might stop recognizing any validity in the other's perspective. You end up with competing orthodoxies.
Where instead of debating with reason and evidence,
they might resort to social pressure, silencing, or other forms of control to enforce their view. The material points out that some attacks on modernity or Western science, claiming other ways of knowing, have equal validity even in areas of empirical fact, risk undermining the Enlightenment legacy.
The legacy of using reason, evidence, and humanistic tolerance to bridge differences.
Exactly. The concern is that if we discard shared standards of evidence and reason, choices between competing knowledge claims get made based on authority or intuition or bias, which is problematic for open, democratic societies.
It closes down dialogue.
It can, yes. It makes finding common ground much harder.
Okay, one last major influence on the self. Religion.
Yep.
How does that fit into this mapping?
Oh, profoundly. Religiously held beliefs are incredibly powerful in maintaining a culture's distinctiveness, its core identity.
And religions themselves aren't static, right? They evolve.
Absolutely. They can change through intercultural contact. The book mentions the ghost dance movement as an example, blending indigenous traditions with elements of Christian messianic beliefs.
And religion taps into deep emotions, defines communities.
Yes, religions define who we are, often very powerfully, and they connect deeply to our emotional centers. This is why an attack on someone's religion often feels like a deeply personal attack on their self.
It's part of their core identity map.
Very much so. However, the material also touches on potentially problematic aspects, citing historical examples like Christian self-renunciation.
Where the individual self is completely subordinated.
Right, to an external power or ideology. The concern is this can lead to a dangerous loss of self, which some analyses connect to phenomena like the embrace of fascism in pre-WWII Germany, a complete surrender of individual agency.
A heavy thought. And even single words carry weight here culturally. The elder versus elder example.
Yes, a fascinating nuance. Elder, with a capital E, refers to a specific respected role in many indigenous spiritual or healing traditions.
Whereas elder, lowercase, is just an elderly person.
Exactly. It shows just how profoundly cultural context shapes the meaning and the meme itself, even for what seems like the same word.
It's all incredibly layered. Maybe the best way to really grasp this is through some of those personal narratives you mentioned earlier.
I think so. Seeing how these concepts play out in real lives makes it much clearer. Let's pick out a few key examples that really illustrate these dynamics.
Great. Let's start with Chantel. Her story sounds dramatic.
It really is. She described herself starting as a rotten little child, got involved in violent crime, ended up in adult prison. A very difficult start.
But she didn't stay there, identity-wise.
No. Sports, especially boxing, became crucial. It gave her an outlet for anger, but also built confidence. This fueled a major shift. She went on to pursue a master's degree in counseling psychology.
Wow. From inmate to counselor.
And importantly, she looked back on that old criminal self and felt it was false, not the real her. A powerful example of self-evolution and reauthoring her story.
Okay. What about Magdalene? Her story involved an accident.
Yes, a motorbike accident led to significant physical changes. She initially described her life afterward as a Forrest Gump life, feeling driven by external events, less by her own agency.
But that wasn't the end of the story.
Not at all. Through that experience, she discovered wheelchair basketball, And this sparked a whole new identity as an athlete.
Finding a new path.
Right. She did struggle with intense perfectionism, especially competing at a national level. But eventually, she found a greater sense of wholeness by prioritizing her family relationships, adjusting that intense focus. It shows how selves adapt and find new balance, even with major external changes.
And Trevor. His story connects to indigenous traditions.
Yes, Trevor, a young Amerindian Cree man. His narratives were explicitly framed within his people's storytelling traditions, which is fascinating in itself.
How did his self evolve?
His journey started with a strong protector meme looking after his siblings. This evolved into seeing himself as a warrior, embracing both indigenous spirituality and, interestingly, Taoism.
A blend of traditions.
Mm-hmm. His activism then led him toward poetry and song. You could see on his map how memes like rememberer of traditions, activist, empowerment animator, and caring all sort of converged.
To create something new.
Yes, they came together to form a new central meme, artist. His activism found a new voice.
That's a beautiful convergence. What about Mao Mao, the student you mentioned earlier?
Ah, yes, Mao Mao. Her story really highlights that collectivism versus individualism tension. She came from China to study in Canada.
Right, and felt like a robot.
Yes, because she felt immense pressure to defer to her parents' decisions about everything, even her university major. Extreme deference was expected.
That must have been stressful, especially in a more individualistic culture like Canada's.
Hugely. She struggled with cultural dislocation, the stress of making independent choices. Her way of coping was converting to Christianity.
How did that help?
For her, it provided a new source of guidance, a framework for decisions, which actually reduced the perceived necessity for a radical self-change or constant internal struggle. It offered a different kind of stability.
The different way to navigate that cultural tension. Okay, and John B., his story involved spirituality too, but differently.
Yes. John B.'s story is quite unique. He was born with a club foot and actually embraced the label cripple early on, but he didn't let it define his limits.
He pushed against it.
Very much so. He drove himself to overcome physical limitations, especially in sports. His animator meme, that sense of agency, was really strong, often linked to challenging authority and engaging in social activism.
So a strong sense of self-direction.
Definitely. But what's particularly interesting is his spiritual path. Despite having no indigenous genetic heritage, he deeply adopted Aboriginal spirituality.
Finding meaning outside his ancestry.
Exactly. He reported profound mystical experiences in sweat lodges. It really highlights how core beliefs and identifications can transcend genetics or upbringing. Yet he also grappled consciously with the idea of a single, real person behind his various context-dependent selves. Who was he, really, underneath it all?
That fundamental question again. These stories really bring the concepts to life. Brent, Tina, Pangloss, Judy, Nick, they all seem to add more facets.
They absolutely do. Each narrative adds another layer, showing the constant negotiation between our internal map and the external world, the drive for stability versus the potential for change, the influence of culture, the power of narrative. It's all in there.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive then,
Right.
What's a big picture takeaway?
Well, we've seen the self isn't simple. It's this intricate accumulating structure.
Built over time.
Yeah, influenced by, well, everything. Our genes, our brain chemistry, sure, but also crucially our language, our culture, the stories we inherit and the stories we tell.
It's stable, we need that stability, but it's also capable of really profound change.
Driven often by that animator within, that spark of agency, but shaped always by context.
And this self-mapping idea, this process we explored, it's more than just theory.
Oh, much more. It's a practical tool. It helps us visualize who we are, maybe identify where we feel stuck, set goals for change if we want to.
Understand those connections, belief, emotion, behavior.
Exactly. It's really a tool for self-understanding and hopefully empowerment. It helps navigate that constant interplay between our inner landscape and the outer world.
Okay, so final thought for everyone listening. We've learned ourselves aren't purely cognitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unconscious drives, feelings, those bodily proto-self sensations,
Yeah.
they play a big role too.
A very significant role, often under the surface.
So here's something to ponder. If you were to map your own self right now, what surprising unconscious drives and characteristics might surface, things you weren't fully aware of. And just thinking about that, how might bringing those hidden parts into the light potentially change your path forward?